I was 5 months pregnant and standing in the dark of my own apartment when he put one finger to his lips and pointed at the window. A car had been parked outside for 40 minutes. Engines still running. I pressed my hand flat against my stomach and I thought, I have brought danger into the same space as my child. And the worst part was I already knew why. 3 days earlier I had pulled this man out of a dark alley with 4 bullets in his back and brought him home. I did not know then who he was. I did not know what finding him would cost me. And I had absolutely no idea that the child I was carrying was already connected to him in a way neither of us could have imagined. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to the rain. Back to the alley. Back to the night I should have kept walking. If you have ever made a decision that changed everything before your mind could stop your hands, you already know how this begins for me. Welcome to Afro Seoul Romance Tales. I am glad you are here tonight. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story. Now, back to Seoul. Back to the rain. Back to the moment everything changed. My name is Adizobi, 28 years old. Nigerian-born. Seoul-trained. Night shift nurse at one of the busiest hospitals in the city. I had been walking the same route home for 2 years. Same alley. Same shortcut. Same tired feet on the same wet pavement at 2 in the morning. I had built a quiet life in this city. Small. Careful. Invisible. I had learned the language and the routes and the rhythms and the 10,000 small ways of surviving somewhere that was not home. But that night I was just a pregnant woman walking home in the rain. Tired. Aching. 5 months along with a stomach that announced itself every time I moved and a back that had been protesting since Tuesday. I almost did not stop. My mind was already halfway to my pillow. My shift had been long and my feet hurt and all I wanted was to get home and lie down and stop thinking for 8 hours. But something made me pull out one earphone. A sound beneath the rain. Barely there. Like breathing that was running out of time. I stopped. I looked down. And there he was. He was face down in the water. Expensive navy suit soaked completely through. An extraordinary watch still on his wrist. 3 dark patches spreading through the fabric on his back like the night itself was trying to swallow him whole. For 3 full seconds I stood completely still. A smarter woman would have called the police and kept walking. But my mother raised me to believe that a person bleeding in front of you is never someone else's problem. And I was a nurse. And my hands moved before my mind could stop them. I knelt down beside him. 2 fingers to his neck. Still beating. But only just. I exhaled slowly. Looked around the alley. Empty. Dark. Not a single soul. I reached for my phone. Then I stopped. Something made me stop. His hands. The way they were positioned. The tattoo on his forearm. 3 Korean characters that sent a cold feeling through my chest so fast it knocked the breath out of me. I had seen those characters before. Not recently. Not clearly. But somewhere in the deep archived memory of a 9-year-old girl going through her father's things after he did not come home, somewhere in there, those characters lived. I put my phone back in my pocket. I told myself it was because I was faster than an ambulance. That was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that those 3 characters told me exactly who this man was. And I was afraid of who might come if I made that call. I was right to be afraid. I just did not know yet how terrifyingly right I was. Getting him to my 3rd-floor apartment was not easy. I was 5 months pregnant. I was not supposed to be lifting anything heavier than a patient chart. But I was a nurse. And nurses do not leave people dying in alleys because the timing is inconvenient. My back screamed at me the entire way up those stairs. I told it to wait. I had been telling my body to wait my whole life. One more night was not going to break me. I cut away his shirt. Worked fast. Precise. For entry wounds. All through and through. No major organs hit. Survivable if I did not stop moving. While I worked the baby moved. Just slightly. The quiet restless movement she had started making lately when I was under pressure. Like she could feel everything I felt. Like she was already paying attention to a world she had not yet entered. I pressed on. When I finally finished I sat back and looked at him properly for the first time. Younger than I expected. Sharp features. A jaw built for giving orders. Even unconscious, he looked like someone the world moved around rather than through. I covered him with a blanket. Then I pulled my chair close and sat beside him. I told myself it was medical observation. I was still sitting in that same chair when the sun came up. Still watching the tattoo on his forearm. Still trying to remember where I had seen those 3 characters before. Still not ready for what the answer was going to mean. There is something I need to tell you before we go any further. I did not come to Seoul for a career. I came because of one photograph. One old faded photograph of a Nigerian man in a military uniform smiling like a man who had absolutely no idea it was the last photograph anyone would ever take of him. My father. He left for Korea when I was 9 years old. He said he would be back before my birthday. My birthday fell on a Tuesday that year. It was raining. I remember sitting at the window in my mother's house, watching the road thinking he would come around the corner any minute. He did not come around the corner. Not that Tuesday. Not any Tuesday after that. My mother said Korea took him. Then she looked away. And that was always the end of the conversation. I stopped asking at 15. But I never stopped watching roads. I had one photograph of him on the wall above my desk. Taken the day he left. I never looked at it while I worked. It made my hands unsteady. And that night I could not afford unsteady hands. But I could feel it on the wall behind me the entire time. Like it was watching something I had not yet understood. I had also made one decision that year that I had told absolutely nobody about. Not my mother. Not my colleagues. Not a single soul in this city or any other. On a Wednesday afternoon in February, I had taken the train to a fertility clinic in Gangnam. I had sat in a clean white waiting room with my hands folded in my lap, and I had made a decision that belonged entirely to me. I had chosen to have this child alone. Not because I had given up on love. Not because I was broken. But because I was 28 years old, and I had spent enough of my life waiting for things that had not arrived yet. I walked out of that clinic alone and went straight to my night shift. I told nobody. It was the first thing in 20 years that was entirely mine. And now I was sitting in a chair at 4 in the morning beside a dangerous stranger in my apartment with that secret living in my body and his tattoo living in my memory. And I had absolutely no idea how connected those two things already were. He opened his eyes at 6 in the morning. First thing he did was assess the room. One door. One window. One woman. In that order. He tried to sit up immediately. I said, do not do that. 3 entry wounds. The stitches will hold, but not if you tear them open in the first 5 minutes. He looked at me. Said nothing. Just watched me the way a man watches something he has not decided about yet. I had expected fear. Gratitude. Anything. What I got was silence. The kind that feels full. Full of calculation. Full of a man measuring every possible exit before he speaks a single word. He said, how long? I said 6 hours. You lost a lot of blood. You are lucky to be breathing. He said nothing. I said you are welcome. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Like the ghost of warmth in a man who had almost stopped believing warmth was something that happened to people like him. He said you did not call anyone. It was not a question. I said no. He said why? I said because I was not sure who would come. He studied my face. Searching for the lie in it. He did not find one. He said my name is Minjun. I said I did not ask. He almost smiled. I went to make tea before he could see that my hands were not entirely steady. I made him soup that evening. He looked at the bowl the way a person looks at something they stopped believing in a long time ago. Like kindness was a language he remembered the sound of, but had forgotten how to speak. He ate in silence. But twice while he ate he checked the window. Quick. Controlled. Almost invisible. The kind of habit a man develops when windows matter. When what is outside can walk through the door without warning. The second time I noticed I said, is someone coming? He said, old habit. But then he moved my curtain half an inch with 2 fingers without taking his eyes off the bowl. And when he asked me what time my neighbors usually came home, I understood that old habit was not the whole truth. Something was coming. I just did not know from which direction. And I did not know how unready I was for it. By the 3rd day he was standing at my window looking out at Seoul like a man recalculating everything he thought he knew. I watched him from the kitchen doorway. He turned and caught me watching. Neither of us looked away. I said you should rest. He said I have rested enough. I said your body disagrees. He almost smiled. That almost smile I was already cataloging without meaning to, the way it started behind his eyes before it reached anywhere else. Like something he did not entirely trust yet. Like a window opening in a room that had been sealed for too long. I went back to the kitchen. I told myself my hands were unsteady because of the long shift. On the fourth night, I came home and found him sitting at my table with my Korean notebook open in front of him. I said that is private. He said you have been in Seoul 2 years, and you still write the English pronunciation underneath every word. I said some of us did not grow up here. He said your accent is almost perfect when you speak. But you second-guess yourself before every sentence. Every single one. Nobody had noticed that in 2 years. Not one person in this entire city. I said, how would you know? You have barely spoken 20 words since I found you. He said I have been listening. For words. For words that moved through my chest like warm water on a cold morning. I sat down across from him before I had made any conscious decision to do so. I did not mean to stay. I meant to take the notebook and go to bed. I stayed for 3 hours. We talked about Seoul in the rain. Lagos in the dry season. The way a city sounds at 4 in the morning when the performance of the day is finally over and only the real things are left. I had not talked like that with anyone since I left Nigeria. I had not known until that night how much that silence had been costing me. And somewhere in those 3 hours the baby moved again. Soft and steady. Like she approved of something I had not yet given myself permission to feel. I pressed my hand to my stomach under the table where he could not see. And I thought, what are you doing, Adiz? What are you doing? I had no answer. And right here is where I should have been more careful. I was not a careless woman. I was precise. Disciplined. I had crossed an ocean alone with a nursing qualification and a reason I told nobody. I had built a quiet, invisible life in a city where I knew no one. I did not make careless decisions. But somewhere between the soup and the notebook and 3 hours at the table talking about 4 in the morning, I had already made the most dangerous decision of my life. I had started to trust him. And trust in the world Kim Min-jun came from was the most dangerous thing of all. On the 5th morning, I came out of my bedroom and found him standing at my desk, looking at my father's photograph. Completely still. His back to me. But something about the way he was standing made the air in the room change. Like a frequency had shifted just outside the range of what could be heard. I said, that is my father. He did not turn around immediately. 3 more seconds. Then he turned. His face completely composed. The way a face looks when someone has worked very hard in a very short time to make it that way. He said he looks like a good man. I said he was. He said was. I said he disappeared when I was 9. He came to Korea for work and he never came home. My mother said Korea took him. She never said anything else. Just that. Korea took him. And then she would look away. Something moved behind his eyes. So fast I almost missed it. Like a door opening and closing in the same breath. He said, I am sorry. I said, are you? He said, yes. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, you recognized him. Just now when you were looking at that photograph you recognized him. He said, you are imagining things. I said, I am a nurse. I watch faces for a living. You recognized him. Do not tell me I am imagining things. The silence between us changed completely. It had weight now. It had history. It had something sitting inside it like a third person in the room who had been there the entire time waiting to be acknowledged. He said, get some rest, Adiz. You worked all night. I said, do not use my name like it ends the conversation. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked away. And that one act of looking away told me more than anything he could have said out loud. I went to work that evening with cold hands and a question growing quietly alongside everything else I was already carrying. I started noticing things after that. The cup of tea on the counter every night before my shift. Without being asked. Without being mentioned. Just there. Waiting. Like he had memorized my routine without me realizing I had allowed it. The way he watched the door every time I came home. Not with suspicion. With relief. The specific quiet relief of a man who has spent too much of his life in rooms where nobody was glad he was there. The way he laughed exactly once when I mispronounced a word so completely that even I had to laugh first. Short. surprised, like it had escaped before he could stop it. Like someone had taught him a very long time ago that softness was weakness, and he had believed them until now. I was falling. I knew it. I knew it the way you know a storm before the sky changes. I was falling for a man I had found bleeding in an alley. A man with no explanation for 3 bullets in his back. A man who recognized my father's photograph and looked away. A man whose silence held more history than most people's words. And I was 5 months pregnant with a child whose father I had chosen from a file in a clinic in Gangnam on a Wednesday afternoon in February. I had absolutely no business feeling any of what I was feeling. I felt it anyway, and that terrified me more than anything else in that apartment. Then one night I came home to darkness. He was standing against the wall beside the window, completely still. One finger raised to his lips before I could speak. I froze in the doorway. He crossed to me in 2 steps, guided me away from the window without a word. I whispered, "What is happening?" He said, "There is a car outside. It has been parked for 40 minutes. The engine has not turned off." The cold moved through me from my chest to my feet. I pressed my hand flat against my stomach without thinking. He looked at my hand, then at my face. And in that moment I saw something I had not seen in him before. Not fear. Something older than fear. The look of a man who has always known that the people sent to destroy you are almost always the people who are supposed to protect you. He said, "Stay away from the windows. Do not turn on any lights. And whatever happens, do not open that door." I stood in the dark beside him with my hand pressed flat against my stomach, and I thought I have brought danger into the same space as my child. I have done the one thing a mother is never supposed to do. And I could not even be angry at myself. Because I knew that if I had to go back to that alley and make the decision again, I would make the same one. God help me, I would make the same one. The car drove away 20 minutes later. Neither of us spoke for a long time after that. Then I said, "They will come back." He said, "Yes." I said, "Then you need to tell me everything." He looked at me. And this time he did not look away. "Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. What story do you want me to tell next?" A woman who discovers the man she married has been lying to protect her. A second chance between 2 people torn apart by a secret. Or something only you can imagine. Drop it in the comments right now. I will be there. Now, back to the night he told me everything. He told me about the organization. About the empire his father built in the spaces between law and order where cities keep their darkest arrangements. About growing up inside it. Learning early that power and loneliness were 2 names for the same room, and that the only way to survive was to need nothing and no one. He told me about his brother. Younger by 3 years. Same house. Same table. Same father. 2 years of slow patient betrayal while Minjun looked the other way because looking the other way was easier than accepting what it meant. The night in the alley. The rain. The cold of the pavement. The sound of footsteps walking away and the certainty in those last conscious moments that this was how it ended. He told me all of it. I listened without moving, without interrupting. The way I had learned to listen to patients in the night ward when they needed someone to stay still and hear them. When he finished, the kitchen was completely quiet. I said, "And my father?" He went still. I said, "Tell me about my father Minjun." He said, "What do you know about why he came to Korea?" I said, "A business arrangement." That is all my mother ever told me. He said, "Your father was a good man. An honest man. He came to Seoul because my father invited him. They had an arrangement that was supposed to make both families wealthy. Your father trusted mine completely." I said, "And?" He said my father was not an honest man. When your father discovered what the business really was and what it was funding, he tried to walk away. He wanted to go home clean. He had a wife, a daughter. He wanted to go home to them. I said, "And?" The silence before his answer was the longest silence of my entire life. He said my father gave the order. The room tilted, just slightly. Like the floor had moved 1 degree and everything standing on it had to find its balance again. I said, "So he is dead." He said at ease. I said, "Is my father dead? Tell me right now." He reached into his jacket. Placed a single piece of paper on the counter between us. I looked at it. A name. An address. A telephone number. Written in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere in the world. The loops of the letters. The way the numbers leaned slightly to the right. Handwriting I had spent 20 years memorizing from the back of one faded photograph. My father's handwriting. My hands started to shake. He said my father gave the order. But the man he sent could not carry it out. Your father was hidden instead. Given a new name. A new life. Far from Seoul. Far from everything he knew. I could not speak. He said he has been alive this entire time, Adiz. He has been asking about you every single day for 20 years. Every single day without exception. My knees failed me. I slid down the wall slowly until I was sitting on the kitchen floor with my father's handwriting in my hands and 20 years of grief cracking open all at once like a dam that had held for as long as anything in this world possibly could. I pressed both hands to my stomach. She was moving. Quietly. Steadily. Like she could feel everything I was feeling. Like she already knew what this moment meant. I thought she is going to know her grandfather. She is going to know him. And I broke completely open right there on that kitchen floor in a way I had not broken since I was 9 years old, sitting at a window watching a road in the rain. Minjun sat down beside me on the floor. He did not touch me. He did not speak. He simply sat beside me in the middle of all of it. Present. Steady. The way a person sits beside someone in a storm when they cannot stop the rain, but they absolutely refuse to go inside and leave them there alone. I had been carrying more than grief that night. I had been carrying more than 20 years of unanswered questions. I had been carrying a secret I had told nobody. And I was not ready yet to understand what all of it meant together. But somewhere in the back of my mind a door was opening. Slowly. Quietly. In a way I could not yet see clearly. When I finally stopped crying, the kitchen was pale with early morning light. I looked at the paper in my hands. Then I looked at him. I said, "Why did you not tell me from the beginning?" He said, "Because I was afraid." I said, "Of what?" "You are not afraid of anything." He said, "I was afraid of the way you are looking at me right now." I looked at him for a long time. His face completely open in a way I had not seen before. Every wall down. Every defense gone. Just a man underneath all of it. Tired. Carrying things that did not belong entirely to him. Hoping against everything his life had taught him that hope was still something a person like him was allowed to have. I said, "How am I looking at you?" He said, "Like you are trying to decide whether I am the wound or the medicine." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Seoul was doing what Seoul always does. Moving. Breathing. Keeping its 10,000 secrets. The rain had stopped somewhere in the last hour without either of us noticing. I said, "I have not decided yet." He said, "I know." I said, "But I am calling this number right now." He said, "I know that too." He said, "And after, if you will let me, I want to be there when you hear his voice for the first time." I looked at the paper. My father's handwriting. 20 years. One photograph. One ocean. One dark alley in the rain. One man with 3 bullets in his chest and a secret as old as my grief. I picked up my phone. I dialed. It rang once. Twice. And then a voice I had not heard since I was 9 years old said my name. Just my name. Nothing else. Like it was the only word he had been saving for 20 years. He said Adiz. And I could not speak. I could not breathe. I just sat there on my kitchen floor with my father's voice in my ear and his handwriting in my hand and the baby moving quietly inside me and Minjun sitting beside me on the floor, and I thought I came to Seoul to find my father. I found him. And somewhere along the way I found something else too. Something I was not looking for. Something I had absolutely no idea what to do with. One last thing before this story ends. Where in the world are you watching from right now? And how is the weather there tonight? Tell me in the comments. Every single comment helps this channel find someone new who needs this story. Help me find them. Minjun left Seoul 3 days later. He had things to face. Consequences to meet. A brother who had tried to erase him. An empire that needed to come apart piece by careful piece. He did not pretend otherwise. He did not ask me to wait. He did not make promises he could not yet keep. But before he left, he stood at my door with his jacket on and his face honest and open in the new way I had only recently learned to read. He said, "You saved my life at ease." Twice. Once in the alley. And once in that kitchen when you stayed and listened instead of walking away. I said, "Do not make it sentimental." He said, "I am being accurate." I almost smiled. He said, "I will come back. If you will let me." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I stepped forward and straightened the collar of his jacket. Slowly, deliberately. "The way you touch something you have chosen to take care of." I said, "I will be here." He left. I stood at the window and watched the street below until he disappeared into the city that had taken my father and given him back. The city that had led me down the same alley 100 times until the night I finally stopped. Then I went to my desk. I sat down. I looked at my father's photograph. The man with the warm smile who had no idea it was the last photograph anyone would take of him. And for the first time in 20 years, I smiled back at him. The baby moved, soft and certain beneath my hands. Like she knew something I did not yet. I was alone in Seoul. 5 months pregnant. My father alive but unreachable. The man I was falling for already gone back into a world I did not fully understand. I told myself we were safe. I told myself the hardest part was over. I was wrong on both counts. What I did not know, as I sat there in that quiet morning light with my father's voice still warm in my ear and my hand pressed flat against my stomach, was that someone else had heard that phone call. And they were already moving. And this time, the bullets would not miss. That is the end of part 1 of my story on Afro Seoul romance tales. Drop a comment right now and tell me what you think happens next. Who heard that call? What do they want? And what happens when danger finds not just me, but everything I am carrying? Don't forget to subscribe so part 2 finds you the moment it drops. Because what happens next will change everything you thought you understood about this story. Share this with one person who needs a story tonight. I will be in the comments reading every single word waiting for you. Afro Seoul Romance Tales, where every love story begins at the edge of impossible. Black Heart, South Korea.